Ralph, did you happen to catch the lunar eclipse last week?
Yeah, that was good, wasn't it?
Or excuse me, was it a solar eclipse?
It was a solar eclipse, yes, because the moon was in front of the sun. Yes, nice to have the correct definition. Yeah, shame I wasn't there to see it. I did see one in Britain, which was back in, I don't know when it was now, about 2003, I think. We had one in Britain. And I went down to see that, and it was actually very exciting. I thought it was quite good. We had a low overcast, which is a very thin piece of cloud just above us, which was brilliant because we didn't have to use any of these goggles. You could just watch the sun, and it was just a sort of faded, hazy sun. But what I wasn't expecting was, as the eclipse went to totality, you got this big rush of blackness coming across the sky, because you could see it on the clouds, of course, from a long way away. And it was like the four horses of the apocalypse coming towards you at a vast rate of speed that ancient man would never have seen before. And we were talking about hundreds of miles an hour. This great rush of blackness came and then went shoom, right over their heads as the sun went into totality. So yeah, it was quite interesting. I think we got the best view of it, having this little layer of cloud above us. It was really good. And I'm not sure if you have seen it, but I wrote an article on eclipses, about eclipses and historical information in general within fairy stories, within children's stories. And there are a few of these that are probably worth mentioning. And the eclipse one is Snow White, so we'll come to that last, I think. Why not? And so I mentioned these in my Mary Magdalene book, Mary Magdalene, Princess of Orange, and it just struck me that we've got this Little Mermaid story, and although a lot of this has been done recently, it seems like someone has encoded some of this information back into the Little Mermaid story, because we have the Little Mermaid as a redhead again. She's a redhead princess, which is what we've just been discussing, the redhead princes and princesses. And of course, there's a wreck on the sea, and the first thing that she recovers from the wreck is a picture of Mary Magdalene. A very famous picture. It's Mary Magdalene and the Smoking Flame by Georges de Tours. So she's directly, and she sits there looking at this picture. She is directly linking herself with Mary Magdalene. And of course, the Magdalenes, well, Mary, both of the Marys, were called the Stella Maris, which translates as being the sea star. They were the stars of the sea. They were mermaids. So it just struck me as the Little Mermaid story is trying to encode little bits of the Magdalene story. And of course, Ariel, who is the Little Mermaid, is looking for her lost prince. And then we have another one of them. We have the Rapunzel story, where again we have this princess looking for her lost prince. And the Rapunzel story is this princess locked in a tower. And she lets down her golden hair. Again, she's a redhead. She's a golden-haired princess locked in a tower. And of course, a tower in both Egyptian and in Aramaic is a Magdal. Again, she's the Magdalene. She's the princess in the tower looking for her lost prince, and her lost prince is Jesus, because of course, as we went through with the Mary in Provence story, that she was exiled to Provence in France, to the city of Orange, which is orange, which is ginger, which is golden, of course. All oranges are golden. And she was separated from her prince. So here was the princess the Magdal, looking for her lost prince, living in Orange, which is the town of of orange colour. So yeah, the only one I didn't really get until couple of years ago. So I've added it now as an extra piece in the Magdalene book. Was the story of Snow White, because it didn't seem to fit in with the other ones. And I'm not sure how I came across this, but anyway, I was thinking about eclipses. I was writing about eclipses, and it suddenly struck me that Snow White is a story about an eclipse. And remember that these children's fairy stories are actually written by people like the Brothers Grimm. And the Brothers Grimm are not just fairy story writers, they were linguists. They were scholars, and they were going around Germany and Europe looking at the ancient traditions that they found and trying to record all of these ancient stories and mythologies from these ancient peoples. That was what they were doing. That was their job. And as a part of that, they started writing these Grimm's fairy tales, which are quite grim. That's where the word comes from. Some of them are a little bit scary. But anyway, Snow White was one of them, and that's not so scary, although it still has its morality tale within it. And it just struck me that Snow White is the Snow White moon. That's the centre of the story. And so we have the Snow White moon, and she is followed, as portrayed very well by Disney, and I'm sure Disney must have known about this, otherwise he wouldn't have portrayed it quite so well. She is followed in a long line by the Seven Dwarfs. And the Seven Dwarfs are the 7 planets from that era. And of course that's exactly what they do. They will follow each other, so the moon will be followed by the 7 planets as it crosses across the ecliptic in the night sky. That's how they travel across the night sky. But Snow White has her nemesis. They always do, don't they? So she has the evil queen, who is actually the Milky Way. It's difficult to explain exactly why she's the Milky Way, but anyway, the Milky Way is very dim, and she didn't like being eclipsed by this bright white moon, who is Snow White. And so she gave Snow White a corset. And being an evil queen, she tightens the corset, tighter and tighter and tighter, until Snow White gets thinner and thinner and thinner, until she faints and dies. And that's a story about the moon, of course. As the moon approaches the sun, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. It becomes a waning moon until you end up with a thin crescent of a moon, because she's got this corset stuck around her midriff, and it's choking her, and it makes her die. And of course that's exactly what the moon does. The moon dies. It becomes the new moon. It goes completely black. It dies, just like Snow White died. But then, as ever, along comes the Lost Prince. Again, it's the Lost Prince story once more. And the Lost Prince kisses Snow White. So this is the sun kissing the moon, which is an eclipse. And of course the sun can only kiss the moon when the moon is dead, because that's how you get a solar eclipse, because the moon has to be just in front of the sun, therefore the moon is dark, the moon is dead. So Snow White has to be dead before she can kiss the Prince Helios, the sun. And then they go into an eclipse, a syzygy is known as in astronomical terms. And as they go into an eclipse, they both happen to be exactly the same size as each other. And they produce this diamond ring, this diamond marriage ring in the heavens above. And then as the sun moves away from, as the moon moves away from the sun, the moon starts to get fatter again. She comes back to life, just as Snow White came back to life, and she gets fatter and fatter and fatter. She is now the waxing moon. She is now pregnant, having consummated her love in flagrante delecto with the sun in the heavens above. And she is now pregnant. This is the story of Snow White. It is an eclipse of the sun by the moon. And it's been encoded into a charming children's fairy story, but that's what it's encoding, and it's related, of course, to the New Testament accounts, because it would appear that the Snow White is sort of Mary the Virgin. She is the Isis figure, and of course, if you look at any image of Mary the Virgin, she is always standing on the crescent moon. She is an image of the moon. So yes, people like the Brothers Grimm have been encoding some of this information that I've been writing about in all of my books into fairy stories. And so I've got now 10 books on this subject, which is bringing this information back out again. I mean, it was all very well the Brothers Grimm putting this information into the public domain, but it is fairly obscure. Unless you know what it's talking about, you're not going to understand what they were trying to encode and preserve for future generations. So effectively what I've done is I've brought out that information, I've explained it to people, so now they can understand it. And so when you see Disney's Snow White, you can understand what it's actually trying to convey. And of course I've done that with the New Testament, the Old Testament, and all of these other old texts, and also, of course, very, very much so with Arthurian legend, explaining what that was supposed to be about. And of course, we talked about that at great length, where Arthurian legend was also encoding a lot of this information for future reference, for future use. But a lot of this information I see has been lost. I mean, who knows about Snow White and what it means today? Who knows about King Arthur and what his mythology means today? I think the knowledge about Arthurian legend was lost maybe in the 15th century, as early as that, and nobody has understood what these texts were all about until now. So unless you read the Grail cipher and find out what it really means, you'll be just reading the mythology again. You won't understand any of the history that's behind it. So that's been the aim of these books, and hopefully we've managed to generate some more understanding about ancient history.